Summer at the Dursleys by Mastercardin42. Chapter 9. Chore Day. Petunia Dursley was in a particularly good mood that day. No, Petunia Dursley was in a particularly great mood today. Despite the fact that she was forced to allow more abnormal and freakish wizards into her home, or that for some odd reason her son had sweat through his bedsheets the previous night, today was her favourite day. For today was Tuesday. Tuesdays always held a special spot in Petunia Dursley's heart, as her ladies' club, made from some of the most respectable women in Surrey, at least that's what Petunia and the other women in the club thought, would meet at one member's house. Today they were about to meet and gather at her humble abode. Petunia had begun preparing for the meeting the previous day, making small sandwiches and ensuring neither Vernon nor Dudley nibbled on them that night, as well as giving the house a good clean down. Luckily today everyone was out of the house. Vernon busy at work, Dudley was having tea with his friends, or so she thought, and Harry and his fellow delinquents were off causing some trouble, or so she seemed. Everything would be perfect today. She just knew it. It was close to noon when the women started arriving. Everyone greeted Petunia with the same enthusiasm. Mrs. Kitters hugged her, Mrs. Polkiss kissed her cheeks, yet Petunia noticed a distance between herself and Mrs. Barb Templeton, as the woman looked at Petunia as if she was a stranger. Petunia just ignored this. Everything was going fine so far, laughing and enjoying themselves, until Mrs. Templeton spoke up. "Ah, Petunia, what is your nephew up to these days?" said Mrs. Templeton. "Why would we concern ourselves with that criminal?" said Mrs. Polkiss. "Yes, the less we deal with my nephew the better," agreed Petunia. "I know, but do you know my niece, Claire? She goes to school with your son," said Mrs. Templeton. "Oh, yes, how is Claire? Dudley fancies her, you know," beamed Petunia. "She's fine, but she did have an interesting conversation with one of your nephew's friends," replied Mrs. Templeton. "Oh, they didn't harass her, did they?" inquired Mrs. Kitters. "If so, I will have quite a word with Harry," snapped Petunia. "No, in fact she was rather pleasant, at least according to Claire. Though this friend of Harry's had something interesting to say about where your nephew attends school," continued Mrs. Templeton. Petunia froze as her heart sped up. Was this it? This was when it finally all came out. Her and her family's darkest secret, their greatest shame. They had a wizard in their home. Petunia wanted to throw the women out, maybe even lock them away, which, though extreme, was better than being seen as abnormal as Harry. All Petunia could do was sit, drink her tea, and pray to God nothing went wrong. "What do you know about Wellington Academy?" asked Mrs. Templeton. "Never heard of such a place," said Petunia at once. "I have. I've heard it's a rather nice school," said an interested Mrs. Polkiss. "Yes, well, according to Harry's friend, Harry attends this Wellington Academy," said Mrs. Templeton, staring at Petunia. "Oh, Barb, surely we can't believe the words of someone who associates with criminals," said Mrs. Polkiss. "I thought the same, so I phoned some Brutuses, and—" "They never heard of your nephew," said Mrs. Templeton bluntly. Petunia was dumbstruck, as all eyes turned suspiciously and accusingly turned to her. She tried to force a smile, but her jitters got the better of her, as she nervously took a long sip from her tea. What had the boy done now? Why couldn't he just leave them be? "So I phoned this Wellington Academy, and they sent me to their headmaster, a Mr. Albert Dumbledore, and he not only was full aware of who your nephew was, but he had nothing but nice things to say about him," continued Mrs. Templeton. Petunia clutched her cup of tea as anger boiled in her at the mention of that name. Dumbledore. Of course he had to be behind it. This must have been his plan all along. Force those freaks into her house and cause as much trouble as he could, tearing apart their perfect world, root and stem. She had to save face. She had to find an excuse. She had to preserve this lie, especially with the entire ladies' club looking at her, confused, suspicious, and even hurt. "Petunia," said Mrs. Kitters, clearly intrigued by this new source of gossip, "you told us Harry went to a school for criminals." "He does," replied Petunia, in a harsher tone than intended. "I don't know what all this Wellington business is, but I can assure you that my nephew goes to St. Brutus's." "Then how do you explain this?" insisted Mrs. Templeton. handing a pamphlet for the Wellington Academy. The women handed it around. Upon opening it, only fouled their suspicions and intensified their accused and curious glares towards Petunia. When the pamphlet finally reached the Dursley matriarch, her heart sank as she opened it and stared at the image inside. There was her nephew, Harry, in a football uniform, smiling along with an entire football team. She would have recognised the boy on the left as Ron, the other wizard staying in our home, and she was too stunned to see him or think of any excuse. "Petunia, are you okay?" asked Mrs. Templeton, not too worried. "Never better. Would you like something to eat?" she asked, desperate to shift the conversation anywhere else. Despite her best efforts to sway the conversation, and her best attempts at excusing this revelation, the topic of Harry and where he actually attends school was the centre point of the entire meeting. Petunia was pestered with questions concerning her least favourite topic, Harry. She had even overheard the other women talking behind her back, formulating their own ideas on why Petunia lied. For the first time, Petunia was thankful for the meeting ended. Unlike previous meetings, she did not help the women out of the house, insist they stay longer, or even wave goodbye. She was grateful for it to be over. Once out of sight, Petunia shut the window blinds. Petunia wanted to cry. She wanted to sob or wail. The day her and her husband had feared for nearly 15 years had finally come. Even after all the trouble with the letters, the Masons, and even the Armagh accident, the family had kept the Dursley name respectable in all of Surrey, and Harry away from the neighbours. Now, the slightest slip, the most insignificant of reveals, had brought it all down. St. Brutus's was more of an insult to Harry. It was a defence, a way of keeping him away from the neighbours' gaze and interest. Now they would want to know him, meet him, and even talk to him. This should have brought tears to her eyes. This should have upset her. However, all she felt was anger towards her nephew, and this reveal and resentment that he was forced to hear to begin with. Her face contorted with rage, and turned a light puce, resembling her husband for a moment. "Potter," she grunted out to no one. For the first time in a while, Harry heard a loud beating on his bedroom door that woke both him and Ron up. "Up! Get up! Now!" screeched his Aunt Petunia. Harry was surprised. It had been a while since Aunt Petunia woke him up in such a manner. Ever since he was sent to Hogwarts, Petunia and the rest of the house had done everything to ignore him and keep their distance. Nevertheless, Harry opened the door, still partially asleep. Upon opening it, Aunt Petunia glared at him, a detested sternness in her gaze. Harry felt like he had returned to his cupboard days, as this was a look his aunt only gave him whenever Dudley blamed Harry for something he did. "Can I help you?" asked Harry, confused. "Don't take that tone with me," snapped Aunt Petunia. Harry looked even more confused, while Ron, from the corner of his eyes, at the tone Harry used, though tired, was pleasant to say the least. "Sorry," replied Harry. "I have decided I am sick of you and your layabout friends taking advantage of me and your uncle's hospitality. I have compiled a list of chores I intend to have you and your friends to complete," commanded Aunt Petunia. She used a disgusted tone when uttering the word friends, like it was some taboo swear word. The sneer on her face, rivaling even the likes of Professor Snape, she handed Harry an extensive list of chores. Now he definitely felt like he was back in cupboard days. The chores on the list were comprised of tedious, insignificant, and simply seemed made up to torture Harry. With tasks such as alphabetize the icebox and straighten the pictures of Dudley. Harry handed the list to Ron, who greeted it with the same enthusiasm. "She's barking mad," said Ron. "Even Mum would never make us do things like this." "I think the neighbours found out about this Wellington Academy," said Harry. "How do you tell?" asked Ron. "My aunt's usually on a warpath when it involves the neighbours. I held a whole list like this when one time a neighbour asked me what my Hogwarts trunk was from," replied Harry. In no time at all, Harry and Ron were downstairs and surprised to find Hermione waiting for them. She had the same tired look on her face as they did. No doubt Aunt Petunia had taken to waking her up as well. Ron grunted as he walked over to her while Harry approached his aunt. I am going shopping for the next meeting for my ladies' club. I want this house spotless when I return, commanded Aunt Petunia in a militaristic tone resembling a drill sergeant. Wasn't there a meeting yesterday? The next meeting isn't until 6 days, said Harry. Don't talk back to me, snapped Aunt Petunia. I have let you trespass in this house for long enough. Now, as I said, spotless by the time I return. With a loud slam and a half, Aunt Petunia was gone. As the trio recomposed themselves, they all stared down at the list in front of them. She doesn't actually expect us to do any of this, said Ron. We should at least try to get some of it done, suggested Hermione, even though she too thought the list was extensive. Yeah, but if I know my aunt, either she'll find something wrong with what we did, or she'll just add something, said Harry bitterly. Let's just do this. Hermione, you alphabetize the icebox. I don't think Ron even has an icebox. Ron, you straighten the pictures. I'll clean the kitchen counters. Begrudgingly, each one of the trio set forth doing their chore, none of them taking any of what they were doing seriously. Line break. Ginny was wearing a bright wedding dress as her father came in to fetch her. With a joyous yet tearful face, Arthur Weasley reached out his hand for his daughters. Ready? He said with a smile. As ever, she replied, her nerves taking over. Father and daughter began to walk down the aisle, passing by the smiling faces of her friends and family. She passed her brothers, giving approving nods, her mother and Hagrid, crying unashamed, and Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, who gave cheerful smiles. Ahead was her future husband, who was staring back at her with his emerald eyes, looking handsome in his dress robes. There was her future, her true love, Harry. Beside him, Ron and Neville, looking dapper in their own robes, along with Hermione and Luna, both wiping away tears in their bridesmaid dresses. At the head was Albus Dumbledore, acting as minister for the ceremony. You look beautiful, beamed Harry. Thanks, she replied, blushing. As the ceremony began, Ginny felt a familiar fear grow around her. She turned to see all of the guests were gone, along with Harry and the others. The church had begun to decay, and soon the fearful voice echoed again. Did you think he'd love you? Said Tom. You are tainted. You are foul. You are mine. Where's Harry? Where are the others? Ginny asked, dreading the answer. Soon a figure emerged from the church. A handsome young man with snake-like eyes and a wicked smile. It was the man who haunted her dreams. The man who would become a monster. Tom Riddle. Or as the brave called him, Lord Voldemort. Ginny began to walk away. Get away from me! She yelled. You're mine, Ginny. And now that I'm back, the handsome features of Tom began to melt away into the monstrous and inhuman face of Lord Voldemort. Harry will be mine. I'll get him first, then you. The best part, it will all be your fault. Heavy breathing and sweating, Ginny awoke startled. It had been a long time since she'd had that nightmare. And it still had the same effect as before. Wiping her brow, she changed quickly and went downstairs to meet with Neville and Mrs. Figg. Her friend and the older woman, who saw the look of distress painted on Ginny's face, and inquired as to how she was doing. Sorry, she answered. Just had a bad dream. What time is it? 9:36, replied Mrs. Figg. Here, have some toast. Hungry, Ginny took a mouthful of toast and looked around the table. Despite it being relatively early in the morning, Harry, Ron and Hermione were usually here by this time. By the look on both of her companions' faces, Ginny could see they were thinking the same thing. Neville, did you hear from Harry or the others? Asked Ginny. No, usually the three are here by now, replied Neville. You think something's holding them up? Said Ginny. Why don't you go after eating? You two can walk over to Privet Drive. It must be Harry's relatives who are keeping him. And if I know the Dursleys, none of your friends are enjoying themselves. Ginny and Neville nodded in agreement. As soon as they were done with breakfast, they were walking through the streets of Wisteria Walk and on their way to Privet Drive. Something strange happened on their journey. A skinny man with a slim moustache and balding hair approached them. "You're friends with Harry Potter, right?" inquired the man. "Yes," replied Neville, confused. "John Gilvin. I live close by. Tell Harry if he ever needs to make extra money, he could mow my lawn," offered Mr. Gilvin pleasantly. "We'll be sure to pass on the message," replied Neville. However, Mr. Gilvin's attitude was apparently shared by the inhabitants of Little Whinging. Both Ginny and Neville walked through Privet Drive and all the different streets. Neighbours and occupants seemed more cheerful and accepting towards them, greeting them with hellos and smiles. A great contrast to the angry glares and worried glances of the people of Little Whinging had been given the young wizards and witches since their arrival. Ginny and Neville made a note to inquire as about it later. Finally, the two reached the bland and all too common setting of number 4 Privet Drive. The driveway was vacant and the garage was shut. And though Ginny and Neville still knew very little about the Muggle world, they knew this meant that Harry's relatives were out. Neville, still a gentleman, knocked on the front door, which was answered by a tired Hermione holding a broom. "There you guys are," she said. "I see you guys are busy," said Ginny, peering in to see Harry cleaning the counters and Ron straightening random pictures. "Harry's aunt gave us a list of chores she wants finished. I think she knows about Wellington Academy," explained Hermione, hints of satisfaction in her voice. "In that case, we'll help," offered Neville. "You guys don't have to help if you don't want to," Harry offered. "Shouldn't expect us to do them." "Nonsense," proclaimed Ginny. "Of course we'll help you guys." "Yeah, plus if we join in, you guys will be done quicker," said Neville. Harry passed the list of chores his Aunt Petunia had given him, and both Ginny and Neville were surprised by the amount and senselessness of each task. Yes, Mrs. Weasley and Neville's grandmother would give them chores to do around the house, but never did they give them tasks such as turning the television channels to Vernon and Dudley's favourites, or rearranging the soap in all the bathrooms by colour. "She is barking mad," grunted Ginny. "Yeah, she is," grunted Ron. "I don't even know how this television works," said Neville. "It's television, or telly." "Don't worry about that, Neville. Harry and I will do things like that. You can sweep the rugs, while Ginny, you can dust the lampshades," said Hermione. I'll do all the bathroom work. My aunt has a very specific way her bathrooms need to be cleaned," explained Harry. "Okay, good luck," said Hermione, bending down to sweep under the living room table. Harry spent close to half an hour wiping, sweeping and organising the Dursleys' upstairs restroom. He knew this was all pointless, as his aunt had already cleaned everything the previous night, and even so, she'd find some small detail to complain to about. Nevertheless, Harry completed every chore in the bathroom as his aunt had assigned him, scrubbing, cleansing, and even rearranging the soap by colour. When he was done, he returned to his friends to see a strange sight. None of them were in the kitchen or the living room. All of them were at the foot of the stairs, staring at something. When they entered, they all looked up at him, with devastated, upset, and sympathetic eyes. Hermione even looked to be on the verge of tears, while Ron seemed to be wrapping his head around concepts too great for him. "What is going—" Harry didn't need to finish that sentence. As soon as he saw what caused this change of mood, something that set his heart beating thoroughly. Behind them, with the door cracked open, was his old cupboard. The cupboard under the stairs. "Harry, why is there a bed in that cupboard?" said Ginny tentatively, though he suspected she already knew the answer. Harry froze as all his friends' eyes looked up at him. What he feared the most about his closest friend spending the summer with him here had come true. They had finally uncovered the severity of neglect and mistreatment he had suffered at the hands of the Dursleys, finding their greatest mistreatment. The cupboard. Hermione's eyes began to water, while Ron and Ginny clenched their fists, a fury growing within them. However, it was Neville who had the oddest expression. He looked ashamed of himself, while also staring at Harry sympathetically. "Harry, did your relatives make you—" Harry had stormed past them before Hermione could finish. "It doesn't matter," he replied firmly. Hermione and the others looked incredulous and upset. They had known Harry long enough to see his reluctance to talk about something, usually when it meant it was true, signalling that he did in fact previously occupy the cupboard under the stairs. Ron and Ginny's anger grew. Neville looked shocked, and small tears began to fall down Hermione's face. Look, what happened already happened. There's nothing to change it, said Harry softly. Nothing to change it? Hermione replied in indignation. Nothing to change it. Just because something happened and it's done, doesn't mean that it's right. Hermione's right, said Neville, still stunned. I mean, my gran can be a little hard on me, but she'd never do something like this. No decent human being would do something like this, shouted Ron. It's awful! It's monstrous! Lashed out Ginny. Harry hadn't seen Ron this upset since Draco Malfoy called Hermione a mudblood. For a second, Harry thought Ron and his sister resembled Mrs. Weasley with her fury. Soon, everybody but Harry was speaking, giving their opinions, lashing out at the Dursleys' actions. Shame and embarrassment filled within Harry, till finally he couldn't take it. Without another word, without thinking, Harry began to storm out of the door. Harry, where are you going? Asked Hermione. To get some air, Harry replied with a huff. Before he could leave, however, Hermione stood in front of the door, stretching her arms and shielding herself between Harry and the door. She wasn't going to let him leave. Anger and shame rose in Harry towards his friends. Why did they think this matters now? It's in the past. Leave it there. Hermione, please move, said Harry firmly. No, replied Hermione, firmer. Move, repeated Harry. No, repeated Hermione. Before Harry could act, a reassuring hand reached out and gripped his shoulder. Harry turned to see Ginny, staring sympathetically at him. Strangely, much of his anger decreased at her touch. Harry, please don't leave. We just want to help, said Ginny. Taking a sombre and deep breath, Harry slowly moved away from the door. Once he was at a far enough distance, Hermione removed herself from the door, and everyone retired to the living room. To Harry's great discomfort, he found all eyes once again on him, like they were expecting him to speak. Harry simply looked away. How long did they make you sleep under there? Asked Neville, breaking the silence. What? Asked Harry, though he knew what the question meant. Don't play dumb! How long did they make you live there? Shouted Ron, pointing to the cupboard. Harry sighed. Till I went to Hogwarts. All their eyes widened, emotion running through each of them. Ron and Ginny returned to their anger, while Hermione and Neville both looked stunned, turning their gazes between Harry and the cupboard in disbelief. Look, it's fine, said Harry to no avail. No, it is not fine. This is the farthest thing from fine. Even when you were a baby? How could they do this to a child? It's inhuman. It's despicable. Oh, Harry. Hermione threw her arms around Harry, fresh tears falling from her eyes. Harry suppressed the urge to push her away. Instead, he patted her on the back, trying to comfort his weeping friend. Ron, on the other hand, looked like he was ready to explode. Ginny seemed less angry and more understanding towards Harry, choosing to give the boy his space, rather than push like Hermione. Unexpectedly, Ron walked upstairs, without uttering a single word. Where are you going? Asked Neville. To pack. We're leaving, he spouted. Leaving? Hermione pulled away from Harry and followed Ron. Soon the others joined her. They found Ron in Harry's room, furiously throwing clothes and other belongings into his trunk. Where exactly are we leaving to? Asked Hermione. The Burrow, perhaps. But anywhere is better than here, he replied, not looking up. Ron, we can't just leave, argued Hermione. Why not? Why should Harry stay here? Why should we stay here? He shouted back. There has to be a reason, replied Hermione desperately. In a very rare moment, Hermione looked to be lost. She was trying in vain to wrap her head around why Harry would be left there. Why would Dumbledore or anyone allow Harry to stay here? Did they know about this? If so, why didn't they stop it? It was at this point that Harry had had enough of this. He was ready to explode. when a needed distraction entered the house in a screeching voice. "I see you failed to clean the house as I asked!" Petunia called. "And where are all of you off to, lazy wizards?" Now, a fury the likes of which Harry had never seen before in his friends rose. Again, Ron and Ginny looked ready to explode. Hermione was breathing heavily as her face was growing red, and even Neville looked disgusted as he heard Aunt Petunia's voice. Before Harry could act or even say anything, all 4 of his friends descended down the stairs like birds of prey. Harry rushed downstairs, finding all of his friends glaring at his aunt, who responded to this with her usual pursed lips and general sourness. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped to the 4 teens. "Now, I see you have failed to complete the list of chores I gave you. Quite ungrateful." Hermione moved forward towards the Dursley woman, staring daggers at the woman. "You made your nephew sleep under the stairs!" Petunia was taken aback by both the statement and by the tone Hermione was taking. Though Petunia was quick to recompose herself, staring at the young witch in disgust and resentment. "What we do in our own home is our business. I wouldn't expect a bunch of layabouts to understand. Besides, we had to," snapped the Dursley woman. "Had to?" yelled Ginny. "You never had to do anything. You think you're justified?" "My mum was right about you. You really are the worst, awful, bloated walruses," snapped Ron. "How dare you?" snapped back Petunia, flames in her eyes. "How dare we? How dare you? You think we're overreacting?" yelled Neville, looking braver than Harry had ever seen him. Soon all 4 of Harry's friends were ganging up on his aunt, blasting her with insults, berates and rants. Petunia was trying desperately to keep order, to keep some semblance that this was her house, but the furious yells and screams of her wizard guests proved too much. Soon she found herself backed into a corner, trying to think of something to say. Finally, Harry had had enough. "Guys!" he called out. "This isn't going to help. Clearly there's lots of emotion here. Why don't me and my friends all take a walk?" Harry suggested angrily. "I would really like it if we took a walk." All of them looked up at Harry as Aunt Petunia cowered in the corner. None of his friends looked like they wanted to leave, but their desire to comfort Harry overrode their desire to target Petunia with abuse. One by one, they slowly moved towards the door. Finally, Harry was left alone with his aunt. Petunia was quick to pull herself back together. An anger that matched her husband's rose. She looked like she was turning a shade of purple. She moved towards Harry, looking like she wanted to hit him, inflict him any number of pain. Simply, she stared at him, as disgusted as ever. "You ungrateful little—" She looked like she was at a loss for words. Her anger was too great. "After all we've done. You sick your dogs on me? Oh, you wait until your uncle gets home. You'll wish you still lived there." She pointed at the cupboard. "Fine. If you think my friends are upset, wait until we see how Sirius and Dumbledore are," said Harry. Aunt Petunia looked threatened. Harry shut the door, leaving his aunt behind. Taking a loud breath, he knew he had to face his friends. He knew they'd want him to talk. Well, he thought grimly, at least it can't get any worse. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that because, oh boy, yeah, that was a blowout and a half, wasn't it? I hope I didn't startle you too much with the yelling, but you have to get the emotions across. I've listened and loved these books since I was 2, maybe even earlier. I grew up on Harry, and I will never get over how cruel it is to raise someone in a cupboard under the stairs. Anyway, guys, oof. A nice thing to say about the chapter is that the neighbours are turning around. I know people in general are fickle and will tend to believe the popular opinion. I think that's because as humans we're a flock species. I don't approve of how fickle they are, but at least it's turning out for the positive in that regard. Oh boy, I like how Neville's stepping up as well. Anyway guys, you know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload, and remember to have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Keep each other safe and keep faith, to quote Lee Jordan. Bye!